The rather unremarkable exterior of this mid-1960s music centre hides a fascinating secret, because this isn't just your normal radiogram. No, this is a bit of a time capsule, a window to the past. Just have a listen to what happens when I press this button.
27, everyone have a good time. Dolly Parton dropping down to 26, Andy Gibb making a new appearance at 25, Carpenters up to 24.
Those are the charts from 1977. It doesn't just hold a little bit of audio from the past. This box holds up to 46 hours of it, all accessible with a turn of this dial.
All you get from Love is a Love.
If you want to know more about this, well, stay tuned and we'll talk all about the Schaub Lorenz Music Centre 5001. Was a German consumer electronics brand created in 1958 after the US firm International Telephone and Telegraph, better known as ITT, merged two German companies that they'd acquired in the 1930s. Those two companies were Standard Electric and C. Lorenz. C. Lorenz was the more interesting of the two. It had been founded by Karl Lorenz in 1880, and by the 1930s it had specialised in teleprinters, so naturally when World War II came around their skills were commandeered to create a cipher machine. But back to 1958, the newly merged company of Standard Electric and Lorenz used the name Standard Electric Lorenz for non-consumer products. But in 1958 they also created a new brand, Schaub Lorenz, which was specifically to target the booming consumer electronics market. And in the late 1950s, one of those booming products was the tape recorder. But the open reel format was intimidating to many. The need to manually thread tape was a barrier to entry. If tape recorders were ever going to appeal to a wider audience, they'd need to be simpler to use. So in 1960, Schaub Lorenz set about working on designing a user-friendly tape recorder. Now, of course, they weren't alone in pursuing this idea. It seems like every company that could hold a soldering iron was looking at this problem. And while the other manufacturers came up with variations on the theme of enclosing ready-threaded tape reels inside a protective caddy, Schaub Lorenz took a decidedly different approach. They believed that the whole tape mechanism should be hidden out of sight, sealed away inside a cabinet, and to address those tape threading concerns, well, they decided the tape would stay in the machine. It would be non-removable. However, there'd also be no need to remove it because their device would have an ample built-in recording capacity of at least 45 hours, and that recording quality should be indistinguishable from the source, and the whole thing should be incredibly easy to use, with a recording being able to be started with just the push of one button. And this is what they came up with. Well, this is one of a range of products that uses the same built-in recorder. This is the 5001. This is the base model. Came out in 1965. It consists of a radio tuner, an amplifier, a speaker, and the recorder, all in one box. There was another model further up the range which also had a built-in record player. Now both devices are mono. This is a mono radio and a mono tape recorder. The single speaker might have given it away. You can plug an external speaker into this though, but it's still mono. You can use the external speaker in conjunction with the built-in one or instead of. As far as the radio goes, it picks up medium wave, long wave, short wave and FM. The FM antenna is built into the cabinet, although you can plug an external one in if you want, although the built-in one gets a really good quality of reception, and the sound from this is really nice as well, especially considering its age. It still sounds excellent, really good rich quality. Let's just turn it up a bit. You might hear a bit of crackling. I need to clean the pots, but not much going on there. Not the best demonstration going. Hold on. Is anyone going to say anything?
The Rivals was written by Dermot Bolger and read by Owen Rowe.
Good. But yeah, nice quality of sound on this. Apparently the amplifier in here was really high end for the day. You know, excellent quality, no expense spared putting this thing together. The speaker's good as well. There were two different looks to the front of this one. This has got like this kind of cream face here. Looks a little bit like something from Braun, you know, like Dieter Rams type design. There's a similar kind of aesthetic to it. There was another version you could get though, which had a wooden front on it, which was more in keeping with other products of the time, 1965, but it just, to me, doesn't look as nice as this one. Now, on the back of here, you could plug a record player into this if you wanted to, and then you could record your records onto the built-in recorder, and you could record up to 46 hours of your own records. So you could have a really massive jukebox of your own music, but it would be a laborious task to copy that across. Most people that had these would use the recording device to record the radio, and that's what happened in the case of this. As far as I can tell from the previous owners, everything that I found in here has been recorded off the radio. Now you might notice along the bottom here that these buttons, some of them are labelled in German. Now of course that isn't entirely unsurprising. Being a German product, you might think I've imported this one from Germany, but no, this is a model that was sold here in the UK, but still without any kind of regionalisation of the labelling, and I'll explain why that is.
Given the complexity of the machine they devised, it will come as no surprise that these also cost a lot to make, and as a result they were marketed at wealthy individuals who cared as much about design as they did about performance. This model with a built-in record player sold for the equivalent of £383 UK at the time, and the base model was £288. So this is 1965 money we're talking about. So if I stick that into an inflation calculator, that's £5,477 for the cheaper of the two. So it will come as no shock to discover that these didn't sell very well. After just 2 years on the market, it was already apparent that the Philips approach to an easy-to-use tape recorder was the way to go. So in 1967, Schaub Lorenz discontinued production of their music centre and moved across to making cassette recorders instead. The unsold stock of 800 machines was offloaded to a wholesaler in the UK, who then sold these to the public at a considerable discount. Now, you know how I simply converted the prices before using inflation to give you an approximate modern-day equivalent price? Well, frankly, that's just rubbish. That's not the way to go about things. You see, the numbers were right, but you can't really just use inflation when it comes to consumer electronics because there are too many other variables that you should be taking into account. For example, 10 years ago, I took this picture on my phone of a 70-inch LCD TV in the Sony shop in New York. At the time, it was the biggest consumer television I'd seen, and yes, in the last decade, phone cameras have come on in leaps and bounds, but also television prices have come down. At this time, this 1080p 70-inch TV was $20,000. So if we're just using inflation on the prices, it doesn't tell the whole story. This advert is from 1968, so that's pre-decimalisation. So the original price of 275 guineas works out as £288, and the discounted rate of 69 guineas is £72. So if we were just to stick the discounted price of £72 into an inflation calculator, it would come out at still almost £1,400. Now that sounds like a lot of money, but to get a more accurate picture of whether at the time this was a good deal, we've got to compare it against what other alternatives were available then. So in 1968, this Akai reel-to-reel cost £99, as did this Sony. In fact, £99 seems to be about the going rate for a 4-track stereo 7-inch open reel recorder. So our price of £72 for the Schaub Lorenz is looking a little bit more attractive. But I know we're comparing apples and oranges a bit here. After all, the Schaub Lorenz is mono and these are stereo. But you also need to factor in that this machine is only a tape recorder. The 5001 Music Centre also contains a decent amplifier and a speaker, as well as a radio, all in the one box. And don't forget the recording capacity. It's got 46 hours worth of tape in here. So to put a value on that tape, we'll need to do a few calculations. A 1200-foot reel of tape running at a speed of 3.75 inches per second gives you approximately 2 hours of recording, just over an hour on each side. In 1968, a 1200-foot 2-hour tape cost 28 shillings. So that means it cost 14 shillings an hour, which is equivalent to 70 pence post-decimalisation. So 70 pence multiplied by 46 hours means the tape could be said to have a value of £32.
So to sum up this whole deal, for your £72 you get a tape recorder, radio, amplifier and speaker, and the equivalent of £32 worth of tape. From that you can understand why this offer would have appealed to quite a few people. Let me go on to explain how it works, because it's a little bit unusual as far as the tape recorder side goes. The radio is just a radio, of course. We've got the usual amplifier, we've got the volume control at the bottom here, but to get the radio on we press this button here.
Fanzines and magazines and clothes.
I'll turn the volume down. So we've got volume, treble and bass, tuning, dial, band selector, and at the top here there's one labelled Autom. That's AFC, automatic frequency control. It'll lock you in on the frequency that you've tuned into and stop it drifting. So all pretty normal stuff. Moving across here, we've got a button for the radio and a button that's labelled centre. And that's the centre is the tape recorder. And then we've got one which I'm not even going to try and pronounce. That's play, pause, stop and record. Now record is one way you'd have to twist it before you push it in. That's just to prevent accidental erasure, overwriting of something that you don't want to record over. So let's go on to the tape side of this now. So we've got the tape mechanism working. I can hear a motor going inside here now. It isn't playing yet though. There are a couple of things to look at here. There's a progress bar. The red indicator starts at the top, works its way down to the bottom, starts at 0, works its way down to 22. It also lists the numbers the reverse way on the other side, so that's kind of like your elapsed time or your remaining time, depending upon which side you choose to read. At the bottom here there's a diamond shape, and inside there there's an indicator that moves when you start the tape. Because there's nothing to look at, there's no reels to spin around, so to know that your tape is actually moving, you've got to look at this little indicator here. So let's get the tape going. So I'm going to press play. Now, there's a little bit of a fault inside this machine. It should be playing at this point. There's a sensor at the end of the tape. The end of the tape is clear, and the idea is that a light is supposed to shine through to a sensor in the machine, tells it when it's back to the beginning, and it starts it going. The light's burnt out, I think. I'll have a look at it later, but it isn't automatically starting. That feature should automatically jump it from one track to another. These are 22 minutes in length, each of these tracks. So once you've recorded one 22-minute track, it rewinds back to the beginning and then starts recording on the next one. Now you can see the disadvantage there. Well, there's a couple. You've got 22-minute long tracks, an unusual choice of time. Half an hour would fit more with most radio programs. So judicious use of the pause button might have been needed if the program had advertisements in it, or a DJ or whatever, but I read online about a chap who wanted to record The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy when it was on the radio, and he designed a way of slowing it down using some sort of cogs and things to make it record half an hour at a time. But yeah, half an hour would have been a more sensible choice. But anyway, 22 minutes in length, and then it records onto the next track. The thing is, that rewinding process takes about 25 seconds. So if you're imagining you're recording a program that's on the radio for a couple of hours or whatever, every 22 minutes you miss about 25 seconds of it, and then it jumps to the next track. It would play back sequentially, so you put it on one track and listen to it and just carry on playing. But anyway, let's get it going. This way I have to just take the pause on and off, and that sort of sparks into life. Now I can see the indicator spinning around at the bottom here. Now, it's going to take a little while before any audio comes through because of that blank section at the beginning of the tape. So, I don't know, maybe you'd even miss more than 25 seconds because it takes that long to rewind, but then you've got this gap again at the beginning. Dodging the copyright again. One thing I will say, if you were to record on this, and say just record for 10 minutes and go press stop. When you press stop, it sends a pulse that gets recorded onto the tape. That tells the device to stop playback at that point as well. So if you were then to play back that recording, it would play those 10 minutes and stop, and that would be the end of that track. So effectively what you're left with is the 12 minutes after that is kind of considered as space to be ignored. A little bit like a hard drive. You know, you kind of free up space to be overwritten at a future date. Now, if you wanted to listen to those extra 12 minutes, well, normally you wouldn't do, but if you jump onto the next track along, let it get past the point where the previous track was stopped, and then jump back. You can jump in on whatever the previous recording was on that track. So quite complicated to copy across everything on here, because it's not as simple as just pressing start and setting your tape recorder going.
Thank you for playing. 2 weeks running. Please keep up the good work. Yours faithfully, Jesse Simpson. Well, actually, I'm a...
Is that Kenny Everett?
That's ABC by the Jackson 5, great record, and that's the last time we're playing that one, which is a drag really, but records go out of the charts. Actually, I'm not fed up with that one yet. Well, I'll get rid of the urge by playing it to myself at home. And now upon the Kenny Everett show we bring to you a disc that's so delightful that I just don't know what to do. It's such a lovely thing that putting it on just isn't enough. So I think that I'll eat it. Delicious.
Now, I don't know if you can see this on the camera here, but this wheel is labelled up A through to O. It's missing out the letter I though, but what happens is you pick a sector, for example K, and then within there you've got 9 individual tracks. So you've got K1 through to 9 and then L1 through to 9. So you've got 9 times 14, you've got 126 tracks. This is a 126 track recorder. Now, just to put that into perspective, I'm sure you're familiar with the 8-track cartridge. This is the latest album from Mark Ronson that's just come out on 8-track for some bizarre reason. But an 8-track tape is a 1/4 inch in width. So we've got 8 tracks on a 1/4 inch there. There's 4 stereo programs, but 8 tracks. Now, these are all mono, of course. So we've got 126 individual mono programs. Now, if you think this came out in 1965, and this came out in the 60s as well. Not this particular album, but this format. So if you could, in the 1960s, fit 8 tracks into a 1/4 inch, we've got to assume that this is using a similar head type of system. So 8 tracks in a 1/4 inch, 126 tracks. Now, how wide would the tape need to be for 126 tracks? Because what we're doing here, when we're dialing this, we're moving ahead down a tape. So there's a big wide tape in here, and there's 126 tracks from the top of it to the bottom, with a bit of space at either end so that you're not causing any issues. So we kind of got a tape wide enough to fit 126 tracks on. Let me show you the mechanism inside the back here.
Before I take off this back panel, I'll just quickly cover off what's on here. This window lets you read the serial number, and on the right hand side we've got the antenna sockets. You can see the top one is plugged into a wire which runs inside the machine. Over on the left is an air filter. I think this machine has a fan inside. You can certainly hear something running whenever it's on. But next to that is a socket labelled 2-channel audio mixer. Now, if you wanted to attach your record player, you'd plug in the supplied preamp into here, which would accept DIN plugs. Above there is the socket for your external speaker. Oh, and of course, finally the power lead, which, as per the instructions, I've disconnected before removing the back. Now, with the back removed, we can see our cutting-edge 1965 innards. Now, starting over on the right-hand side, it might look like there's just the one speaker, but that unit consists of 2. There's one that's 21 centimetres in diameter and one that's 6.5, and those are located in front of the transformer. From here I can also access the bulb inside, which should light up the radio tuner display, and I unscrewed it just to get the model number and ordered a few replacements. Now, as far as the rest of the mechanism, the interesting stuff, well, it's all hidden behind this circuit board. But conveniently enough, the board is hinged, so after releasing a couple of catches, the whole thing can be folded down to reveal the rest of the internals. But before we get to that, here are a couple of close-ups for those people who like to see this stuff. Okay, so here's the main event, the 2 tape drums. The tape moves from the left reel to the right one as it plays. Now, these are rim drives with a motor allocated for each reel and a braking mechanism as well on this right one. To help with scale, this is a standard size playing card. I think Lemmy would approve. The notice is telling me not to touch the tape, but at the moment we're just looking at the clear header, so we're okay. Now, the only tape transport controls you get with this machine are play, pause and stop, of course record as well, but as far as moving the tape around, there's no ability to fast forward it. And as far as rewind goes, you can't control that. It just goes all the way back to the beginning. You can't stop it earlier than that. And that's a significant limitation, because with these tracks being 22 minutes in length, if the thing you want to listen to is at the end or towards the end of one of those 22-minute segments, you're going to have to listen to all the audio that comes before it first. The tape speed is an average of 10.5 centimeters a second. I say average as the speed changes slightly as the tape advances due to this being a rim drive mechanism. However, as the tape always advances at the same rate and gets played back in the same machine that it was recorded on, this isn't an issue. 10.5 centimeters a second is more than double the speed of a standard compact cassette. And even though the track width will be narrower on this, the quality of the recordings are very good. As far as I'm concerned, pretty much indistinguishable from live radio. Now we're really looking at the back of the mechanism here, so you can't see the tape heads from this angle, but you can see the back of the green felt pad that the tape gets pushed up against. This is the equivalent of that little sprung pad that you get inside a cassette. Now recording studios commonly used 1-inch, sometimes 2-inch and occasionally 3-inch wide tape, but from what I read, the 10.2 centimeters or 4-inch tape in this is the widest one that was ever made and unique to this device. So if it snaps, you've got a problem, which makes the high speed of the rewind all the more concerning. To get a look at the tape head, we're going to have to remove this front panel, and this is also how you get to the two bulbs which should be lighting up the control wheel. Now when you're recording, the right hand bulb lights up, which turns the display red. The progress bar should also be illuminated by another bulb from behind, which also lights up the wheel at the bottom. Now my replacement bulbs turned up, but it turns out that the bulbs in the machine are fine. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just the whole lighting circuit that isn't working. It did seem odd that all the bulbs would have failed. So I've downloaded the service manual, but it's something I want to look into on another occasion because I'm concerned about damaging the machine before I've got all the recordings off it. Now back to that tape head, you can see it moving up and down against the brown tape that's behind it here. And of course that tape is getting pulled across that green felt pad we saw earlier on. Now, talking about getting those recordings off here, that's going to be quite some job because I'm going to have to do it all in real time. And this device, the only outputs are the speaker on the front and the socket for a speaker on the back. There's no headphone socket on here. Ideally, I'd want to just plug it in through the headphone socket into my PCM recorder. So to get around this limitation and do a direct recording, I've got this adapter, which is a speaker socket to RCA plug. Now, I don't think it's supposed to be used for this purpose, but it does work, although it seems to get some quite thin sounding recordings, so they need a little bit of equalization after, but it's better than recording through the microphones where I pick up all sorts of background ambient sounds as well.
Yes, it's 5 o'clock and time to join David Bellon at the Radio 2 news desk.
It now looks as though this morning's coup in the Seychelles in the Indian Ocean may not have been as bloodless as was first thought.
A few things have conspired to make these particular machines into time capsules of an era. First off, you've got 46 hours worth of recording capability. There's no need to be frugal with your tape. More than likely, if somebody bought a tape back in 1970 for their reel-to-reel machine, they'd perhaps record over it a few times. Or they might just use it for recording their records onto. This is a machine that most people would record the radio on. So we've got 46 hours worth of more than likely radio recordings. Now, back then, if you were recording something off the radio, you'd have perhaps a little logbook which would tell you what you'd recorded in each of these 126 sectors, and you might sort of go, I don't want M6 anymore, I'll record over that. But I think more than likely most people would just move this until they heard there was nothing there and think, oh, that's it, I've got a blank track there, I'll just record on this one. So you get all these little snippets of recordings that date from different eras. And then we've got that issue with half tracks worth of recording where someone's pressed stop before the track's ended, so you get little snippets after that you can still access by jumping to that track after it's gone past the stop point. So these things tend to be full
of little bits of audio from the past. Now, the past that they contain doesn't tend to be like the 1980s or 90s, because, I mean, look at it. People bought this in perhaps 1969, 1970, maybe the latest. And they got it because it was a bargain at the time, and they used it to record the radio. But then at a certain point in the 1970s, no doubt they moved over and started using a compact cassette, especially when you start getting car stereos and you want to play the tapes that you've recorded at home in your car. Well, of course, everything in here is stuck inside this box. So these things, at some point, people just probably binned a lot of them, but the ones that have survived contain recordings of usually the 1970s. And some perhaps even back to the 1960s. So these are particularly fascinating for listening to old radio recordings, and a lot of this stuff probably was never recorded by the stations or is available to listen to now. So you can jump through here and hear DJs that unfortunately are no longer with us, and I'm actually listening to a lot of songs on here that I think, oh, I don't recognise that song, and I'm enjoying a lot of it. I didn't realise how much good music was coming out around about 1977. You always think of the kind of some of the rubbishy stuff, like the, you know, like bad disco tracks and things, but there's some great stuff on here. I mean, you listen to the charts, it says a new entry at number 10, it's the Eagles with Hotel California, things like that. You know, so fascinating devices.
Number 9 this week, I Will Survive, Gloria Gaynor. At 8, In the Navy, Village People. At 7, He's the Greatest Dancer, Sister Sledge.
Now, it's easy to understand why this wasn't a massive success, but what I really do like about this box was that it was somebody thinking completely outside the box. You see, when it comes to tape, you can normally trace the family tree back. For example, if you've got an 8-track cartridge, well, previous one was the 4-track, before that the NAB, before that was the Echo-Matic. There's a whole line of cartridges that are roughly similar. Even if you go to compact cassette, it looks like the RCA Soundtape cartridge shrunk down, and the L cassette looks like it kind of slightly modified. So there's always a kind of pattern with these. This is just off there, it's just going in a completely different direction. This is like a PVR for audio. I mean, we're used to the idea now of having a box under the television that stores programs we've recorded and there's no removable tape format. Well, this is pretty much that, but just for the radio, or your records if you were to put them into it. But just think about this, it's got 46 hours worth of recording in here of audio, and it's all accessible by turning a dial. Now, does that sound like anything that might have come out, you know, a little bit smaller, perhaps fit in a pocket, kind of a white colour? Yeah, no, nothing's really springing to mind. I mean, I could do the old clickbait title, the original iPod, the massive iPod, but these ideas come around over time. So originally we're talking about removable audio on a format, a tape format, and then these guys try to say, no, we don't need it removable. We want it all sleek, easy to use, one button recording, easy access to the recordings that you've made with just one dial. And then, of course, we kind of went back to compact cassettes and even reel-to-reels, 8-tracks, all that kind of stuff. But then it came back round again and somebody just made something similar to this in a way that you could fit in your pocket. And that is how we've progressed now. That's the route we've gone down. The kind of removable tape formats are, you know, just novelties now to a lot of people, whereas everyone's used to solid-state recording. So, yeah, what goes around comes around. I don't expect that this is going to be something that a lot of people would want in their house. In fact, it's taking up so much room here. You've seen that I've had to shoot it in this rather unusual location with this beautiful real stone wall. But it's the only place I could put it down and get enough light on it. And it weighs a ton as well. It would break my normal cabinet. But yeah, I hope you've had fun looking at the Schaub Lorenz Music Centre 5001. I should point out, it should have a logo on the bottom left there, which is missing, a bit like this, but it should say Schaub Lorenz on there. But anyway, hope you've enjoyed it. What I'll do, I might play some audio that I've recorded off this using my little adapter at the back here, and I'll play that over the usual Patreon credits. And if I find anything particularly interesting on here, I'll put some audio out on Patreon to those people who help to support this channel, because buying things like this just isn't all that cheap and the ad revenue isn't all that great at the moment. Patreon people are the ones who keep this channel going. But that is it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.
Motor racing now, and a report on the Belgian Grand Prix at Zolder from Simon Taylor. Gunnar Nielsen, the 28-year-old Swedish driver, has won the Belgian Grand Prix, the first Grand Prix victory of his career. Second was Niki Lauda, and third Ronnie Peterson. It was an extraordinary race. It began in heavy rain with the entire field on wet tyres, except James Hunt, who was taking a gamble on it drying out. Initial leader John Watson and race favourite Mario Andretti skidded off the soaking wet road together after only half a lap, while Jody Scheckter, who led throughout the wet part of the race, fell back with tyre troubles. In the confusion, as the track dried and everybody had to change back onto dry tyres, Jochen Mass led for a while, so did Brambilla, so did Niki Lauda. But Nielsen moved relentlessly up the field in the Lotus and took the lead from Lauda's Ferrari with 20 laps to go. Behind Peterson's six-wheel Tyrrell, in fourth place was Vittorio Brambilla's 30s, and fifth was Alan Jones's Shadow. So confused was the race that even though it finished half an hour ago, the officials are still not sure who was sixth. We think it was James Hunt, a lap behind after his valiant battle through the wet part of the race.
Well, that's it from the Sports Desk for the moment, but join us again for Sunday Sport just after 7 o'clock, and now let's go back to the Charlie Chester Show.